You are listening to the podcast To Be Single or Not to Be by Shanna Montana, a podcast where we talk about the single life, dating, and relationships so you can make a decision at the end of each episode and decide to be single or not to be. That is the final question.
This is the To Be Single or Not to Be podcast, and we're doing what? Running it back. Hi, guys, and welcome back to the To Be Single or Not to Be podcast. And we are back with another episode from the Running It Back series. And today we are talking about an episode that I really enjoyed recording back on April the 29th of 2019 when we did it. I don't know if I remember the exact feeling, but I know that this is a topic that I just enjoy talking about, especially since I've gotten to a place in my own life where I no longer do the bending. And what we're talking about is non-negotiables and how many of us have them. So I used to always say I had non-negotiables, but it was bullshit. It was bullshit. It was bullshit. Can we get it was bullshit in the back? It was bullshit because as soon as somebody came up looking how they was looking, was able to wink a little eye, give a little change, take a bitch on a little date, I was willing to, non-negotiables. When non-negotiable, what? Who is that? Who said that? Who had been doing that? Like, went completely out the window. So I want to talk about how, the perspective that we had on non-negotiables back then and see if we would agree with it. See if we agree with it, or really talk about where we are with it now. So back then we had quite a few ladies on. Two ladies were married and one was single, and she's a therapist and she's still single, and those two ladies are still married. And so one thing we talked about was when it came to non-negotiables, the way, and I agree with this, one of the reasons that we sometimes would struggle in our relationships was because we were like chasing this dream or this idea of a relationship that we wanted unattached from what God has for us. And it's like, this is the same, because to me, that is a lot like delusion. When women are out here just showing and having unhinged and delusional behavior, I'm always like, what has you going to the ends of the earth like that, acting out of character, because that's not who you are, moving in ways that you highly do not recommend 10 out of 10 for anyone to act like, just doing things that are not becoming of the woman that we know you are. And many times it's because we are chasing after a man, a situation, a relationship that is not aligned with God. We have not talked to God about it. We do not even know what our vision clearly is for what we desire in a relationship. And so it's like we are running after this thing that we have an idea of what it should look like. And we want a person to treat us this way. We want a person to give us these things. And we want a person to create this relationship for us. But we have done nothing to set ourselves up for success. And by choosing terrible partners in that way that cause us to have unhinged behavior, it really just sends us on this trajectory to really never get what we want and never be able to implement any of those non-negotiables because we did not put our foot down from the beginning. So what it comes down to, it's kind of like, I feel like as a teacher, I'm sure like first day of class, you have to come in and you have to lay out the rules. And I feel like in any job, when you're a leader, you have to come in and kind of lay out the rules. And I'm not saying going into a relationship, you're going to show up to the first date and say like, nigga, I need you to sign this contract. You're not going to show up on the first date and be like, I need you to look at all these said things. But I think that if you have these non-negotiables in your mind, and you also don't show up to a relationship, I'm say this to the first date or any of the first few dates and like try to just list out and lay out all the things that you want. What happens is if you do the pre-work by figuring out what your non-negotiables are, when you start the dating process and you start to get to know people, you know what questions to ask, what answers you need to hear, and you also know what to listen for with what this person is telling you, because in regular conversation, most people are going to reveal to you who they are. And it may not happen immediately. It may take a little bit of time. Don't give it too much time, but you will uncover who a person is. And once you're able to uncover that, you can then see how the cards are laid out to determine, is this something I can deal with? Is this something that's a real non-negotiable? Or is this something I can do some bending on, which we shouldn't be doing any bending? Or is this something that's like a hard stop? And so I think this also goes back to, I always say you have non-negotiables, which are a hard stop. And then you have desirables. I think that as desirable, I desire to have a person that is, 6 feet or taller. But if he's 5'11" and meets all the other requirements, I'm not going to run the other way. And that's only because, it's a tall girl. It's really hard to make a whole lot of exception in that area because I just don't have a desire to be looking on top of anybody's head, at any point when we're standing up. With heels, I'm 6'4", and I'll just leave that there. So the next thing will be, we talked about how sometimes we are, and I just touched on this a little bit, I want to go in a little deeper, chasing that idea. I think that when it comes to relationships, Disney movies have, just mucked us up in some capacity, that we feel like there's always going to be this happily ever after. We feel like things are always going to go well. We're going to get, we're going to get what we desire in a relationship or in a marriage in this very nice and pretty package, and it's not going to have any bumps in the road. And so when you haven't done the work to really understand the layers that go into a successful relationship and what is going to be required of you when you show up to that, because it's more than just asking to give. For somebody to give to you, you got to give to them. It has to be an attitude, like a servitude. Like, how much can you give? How much can I give? We want to outserve one another. So you have to be able to show up in the fullest capacity. It's like a job. You got to show up every day, even on days when you are exhausted, and you got to be able to fight the good fight with your person. So I think when you are chasing this idea, it's harder, because it's kind of like, if you meet a person and you really don't have a clue of like what you want or what your non-negotiables are, you're going to get this person, and things always start out good for the most part, and you're just going to kind of go with the flow. And then as you run into these bumps in the road or these hiccups, you just kind of brush them off and be like, I don't really like that, but I'm gonna keep going. I don't really like that, but I'm gonna keep going. I don't like that. Damn, so you're gonna get to a point where it's gonna get bad, and you really aren't even gonna have an opportunity to like even put your foot down and say, I'm not taking this, because you don't even know what you are taking. And I always say, if you don't show up to the table and tell somebody how to treat you and what is required of being with you, they will show you how they're going to treat you. And they're going to show you what they're going to give you, whether it's required or not. And if we aren't prepared, and if we're in a vulnerable space and we've been single for a while, and we, just want some companionship, more times than not, we take it, unfortunately. So I think that we have to make sure that we work towards having a list. And that's something back April 29, 2019. Back then I had started a list, and I even said on the show, I have a list, but that list was so generic. That list was so little. That list was so basic. That list, I was looking for a piece of paper or something to show y'all. The list probably was like this, the list. My list now, I'm gonna tell y'all know I always talk about that 300 things list that Steve Harvey said. Write down 300 things that you want to see happen in your life over the course of the next year. And I write down things that cover my whole life. But one night I was in my bed, because a lot of times I write right before I go to sleep. I'm a writer in that way. And I like journaling and all that stuff. But I was writing things out in my 300 things list, and not even, I don't try to go in any specific order. I just write what comes to my heart. And I started writing about what I wanted in a partner. When I tell y'all, I literally sat there and wrote literally I was gonna say 300 things, I was about to lie. I literally wrote 3 pages of things that I am looking for on my list. Basically, that why was it 300 things list? It was like 300 things. Not 300, I keep saying 300 things. It was 3 pages worth of things from my 300 things list. There we go. That I wrote out in that one sitting. And it was like, I could not put my pen down. I just was writing. Like, I couldn't even stop. It was almost like my pen was on like this, like autopilot. I just was writing. And then I came back and I read it to make sure it made sense. And everything that I wrote made sense. But that's just to let you guys know, from 2019 to 2023, the evolution and the growth and the journey of what my life has been like, for me to get to a point where I can easily write out so many things that I desire and I require and are non-negotiables in my relationships. Whereas before, I had no clue. But also the thing is, knowing that even with, I could have probably write out 300 things, but knowing that once you get in a relationship, you're going to consistently learn new things about your partner. You're going to learn new things about yourself. You're going to learn new things about how this relationship should operate, that list is going to be ever growing. So it's almost like the list never stops. So being that you already have this list that you built in, can promise you it's never going to stop, because you're going to have to add things as the relationship grows, things change. You got to at least show up with something. And if you're showing up with something minimal, goes back to that, relationship vision board, those relationship pillars that I talked about, being able to look at those. And as you go through and you say, okay, what we're talking about, the spiritual, the mental, the emotional, the financial, as I'm talking about those things, let me dive into them. What are the things on these pillars that I need to put on my list that are non-negotiables for me? And I feel like back then when we talked about it, my list was not up to par. The people on the show, the ones that were married, their list, I would say, must have been up to par to get married, I would assume. But I think that that is an area that we definitely have to do more work in. And I think the list will allow us to be able to then see, like, these are the things that I just cannot negotiate. Like, my happiness is tied to my non-negotiables. If I do not have these things, I will not be happy in this relationship with you. And if I cannot be happy in a relationship with you most of the time, I do not have a desire to be in relationship with you. And that's the kind of radical honesty that I'm on, that I'm giving, that I'm asking for. Like, I don't want it if I cannot have happiness, because my life right now, knock on wood, and we're going to claim and ask the law of assumption to activate it, and that it will carry on, that I have happiness in my life right now. So there is no way that I'm going to let you tap into my life and make it a place where it's not a happy space anymore. So we have to get back to that, to figure out, what it is that we need to have on that list and what we are not going to bend on. So then the different things that we just talked about, say, you have the non-negotiables and then you have the desirables. So something we talked about that I feel like we have to be aware of is really just determining what is a non-negotiable and what are the layers of it. So what are the non-negotiables? What are the desirables? What are certain, character traits that I need? What are the things that are most important? What are the things that I cannot be flexible in? What are the things that I have to stand my ground on? You have to think about all those aspects. And that was something we touched on a little bit, but I feel like present day even more so, because we now have all this access to each other. We have access to so much where, before, prior to social media, how do we get to know people? Well, we had MySpace for a little bit, but you really had to, like, meet a person face to face and get to know them. Most times when a person meets you, even if this is their first time meeting you face to face, they've met you before. They've met you on social media. They've met the representative of what they see on social media, which is really wild to me in regards to that, because I've had more men than not tell me, I feel like you're somebody I could be with. And I'm like, based on what? And they'll name all these things that they see on my social media. And while my social media is like a piece of my life, a small portion, it's a true depiction, what you're seeing, it still, I would say, doesn't tell anybody like the character of who I am. It doesn't tell anybody like, what kind of peace I would provide. It doesn't tell anybody, what my hygiene is. It doesn't tell anybody, like, what the core things are that you need to know before you decide that you're somebody I could be with. I think that ultimately in those situations, people tend to get on social media and they see that, what I found with some Negroes, I've been told this too, it's almost like when they say objects are closer than they appear in this mirror. I've been told literally, like, the way you looked from afar, the way you looked online looked so fun, or it looked this way, and I really liked it. And once I got up close on you, I realized it was different, or I realized it was a lot and it was too much. And I'm okay with that. I can appreciate the candor. I can appreciate the honesty, but you need to stay far the fuck away from me, because if you saw a portion, very small portion of my life online, and then you had the privilege of getting up close and personal to me, and I was too much. If I'm too much, honey, go away, go find somebody that's less, because I ain't it. Sprinkle, sprinkle. So that said, and if y'all don't know what I say, sprinkle, sprinkle, go look up Shira7 on YouTube. She gives advice. I'm not going to say if it's good or bad, but I just like when she say sprinkle, sprinkle. So that's why I say it. But the thing is, I feel like when it comes to the different aspects and layers of what you want, that you have to be able to just really, like, determine what is most important to you and what a lot of it should look like and what a lot of it should not look like. Like, there in my non-negotiables, I'm big on, there are different character traits. Like, I'm big on integrity. I'm big on, how do you show up in the world? I'm big on making sure that, how do you treat people? What are your values? What are your morals? What wakes you up? Like, what makes you happy? That's one thing, finding out, so many times you may ask a person what makes them. You ask me right now, Shayna, what's making you happy? What's making me happy right now is, like, the peace that I have in my life right now. And I could go down a list of, what brings me peace is, being happy in my career, the progress that I'm making in my business, having, good my family and the friends that are friends that show up for me in the capacity that I need to. You know, I can name things that make me happy, and I will only want somebody who can add value to that and not take away. So I'm able to name that. You know, asking somebody for me, you know, what makes you happy? They don't have no answer. Why you ain't got no answer for what makes you happy? Probably not happy. That you should be able to answer that. So if you, that's the thing to look at. You know, like I once asked this guy one day, you know, like, you know, what's something you're passionate about? Because, you know, I'm big on, you know, passions, and I'm not saying you got to be out here trying to save the world, but I'm like, you know, what's something you know, really enjoy, you're passionate about, you know, you put effort and thought into things like that. And they had nothing for me. No judgment. It's just like, I don't want to be with somebody like that. They don't have anything they're passionate about. Like, you could have been like, I'm passionate about my comic book collection. I don't know. I'm not saying I would have appreciated the comic book part. Nothing against comic books. I actually like comic books. I used to, you know, we used to read. Let me, I have a nostalgia in between. You know, I'm passionate about collecting comics. Okay, you know, whatever it is. I wasn't looking for any certain answer, but if you don't have, for me, it's certain things that when they don't exist for me are like, yeah, that's a non-negotiable. Like people that when you meet a man, like men that don't have any friends, I ain't got no friends. I done dealt with people like that. And I feel like, and Jay Shetty said this on his podcast, he's another podcaster and like a life and relationship coach. That, you know, when it comes to family and relationships, you know, there should be time you, of course, spend together, but time you spend with your friends, time that you spend with their friends, time that you spend together amongst friends, you know. So if you don't never have no friends, like who is your outlet? I know God should be first, but after that, everybody has somebody, at least one trusted friend that they talk to and they confide in. So, you know, like who do you talk to? Who's your outlet? Like it's just certain things like that. So I feel like those were things that we looked at then, but we have to take an even bigger and microscopic look at present day, because we now just have so much access to so much of people's lives, especially, you know, because people can post as much or as little as they choose to. And if it's a person that posts a lot and you get to see it a lot, you may think you really know that person. And you may think when you pull up on them, like it's understood, you know, he's a good person, he's a good dad, he's a good this, he's a good that. Girl, you have only seen a picture. You got to show up and pull up, and I'm disregarding everything I saw online, other than what you look, making sure you ain't catfish when you show up, making sure you looking how you looking. So, okay, you passed that test. Now we about to get to my test. Let me pull out there. Let me, but let me get to it. So I think that that's definitely things that we have to have on the table, and just understanding that, you know, what you see is not always what you get, meaning that like what you see on social media is not always what you get. So you have to be able to pull up on them and let them know, like, this is what I require, this is what I want, and this is what this absolutely should look like. Now, the next thing is that upholding that we talked about in regards to non-negotiables was that we are now in a position and we are better able to have non-negotiables and to be able to stand our ground on those non-negotiables a lot more than our parents and grandparents were. And this goes to another episode that I recently talked about, that, you know, how times have changed, and that the reason that, you know, it's some of the marriage statistics, that was an earlier episode, the marriage statistics are what they are now versus what they were then, because we don't have to stay in marriages for the same reasons. And I used to always say, you know, when people would say, I look up to my grandparents and them being married for, you know, many, many years, I would say in most of our grandparents' marriages, what we really looked up to was the longevity, because the value of what was underneath the longevity was not there. It was like, we looked up to the time that you've been with this person for 25 years, but the struggle and the hell and the infidelity and the disrespect that you possibly, not all, but some possibly went through for 25 years is not what I have a desire to do. And if that means I have to withstand all that to have a 25-year marriage, then I don't want it. You can have it, you can keep it. So that said, when it comes down to non-negotiables and being able to uphold the standards that our parents and our grandparents and our families had, the perspective of marriage has just changed in that regard. So, you know, it was like back in the day, you got a gold star for being married. You got a trophy for being married. Like that was a thing. You had to get married. And I think that even now, unfortunately, some people, and I've been, unfortunately, I've been victim of this, of people making me feel like, despite all the success that I really have had in my life, that even though I'm not married, so people have been guilty of this, making me feel like despite the success that I've had in my life, since I'm not married and I don't have a child, that I have still not done enough. I still have not arrived to the destination of success. And that is unhinged behavior. Those are unhinged thoughts that I no longer allow people to subscribe to and put and project on to me. Because I know that right now, if I never did anything more in my life beyond what I did in this moment, I did more than your mammy. I'm sorry. I know that if don't do anything more than what I've done in my life from this moment going forward, I have done enough for me. I'm satisfied with where I am. I know that I'm going to higher places. I feel it every single day. I move up higher in my trajectory of just, to me, going higher in life is just progressing in my spirituality. But if we're going to talk about it from a business perspective, from a professional perspective, from an entrepreneur perspective, I grow in that every single day. And so that will come with another layer of success. For me, the success it is in different categories. It's overall, but you have different kinds of success, so I'm not, it's like, it is a success if you choose to become a mom and you're able to have a child. That's a win. It's a success if you are able to go and, get married and have a successful marriage. That's a win. It's a success if you're able to go into a career path and, be promoted and become the president of that company. That's success. It's success if you're able to go, you buy a house. That's success. So life has all kinds of wins all around you. But it's up to you to determine, what does your life being successful mean to you? And so that's why I say, like, my life up to this point has been successful. And even though I know I have more places to go, I'm going to see more success, I no longer subscribe to allowing anybody to diminish what I've done right now by minimizing it because I don't have a husband or I don't have kids. And so that is the difference when it comes to our parents' generation and our parents of looking at, you being married, you did the thing, that's it. But it's like, no, that's not it. Like, yeah, it's cool being married, but it's more to life than that. So I think that the standards of what was required back then and sometimes carrying over to now made it to a point where people really didn't have non-negotiables because they felt like, I'm going to do the bending. I'm going to do whatever it takes in order to get this ring, because if I get this ring, this means that I'm successful. And in order for me to get this ring, I may have to be in a position where I will take anything. I will deal with anything. You can throw anything at me and it's not going to be a problem. There's nothing that you can do to make me say, I don't want to be here, or I choose not to be here, or I'm going to stand my ground and say, no, you're not allowed to treat me that way. No, you're not allowed to do that to me. All those things. It's like we were in a position where we couldn't have standards. We couldn't have boundaries. We couldn't have non-negotiables. We couldn't have things that we felt like we weren't going to do because we wanted to get that gold star just to say that we were married. And that shit exists no freaking more. So I can tell you if in 2019, if I said anything different, I was completely unhinged. But I know now, present day, 2023, when it comes to non-negotiables, I started out by saying, how many of us have them? You better make your list. And you better check it twice, girlfriend, because you have to have those non-negotiables. Because again, I can't say it enough. You got to be able to pull up on people and tell them what they gonna do and what they not gonna do. Like, I'm just sitting here thinking about back to past relationships and past situationships and things that I just dealt with. And I allowed, because I take full ownership, things that I allowed to be done to me that I did not agree with, but for the sake of fear of someone leaving me, for the sake of not really knowing what I wanted, for the sake of taking bad advice, for the sake of thinking that, certain things were okay because it was just how relationships go and it's not that way. And if that's just how relationships go, I ain't got to have one. But for the sake of all those things, I didn't have non-negotiables that I was willing to stand 10 toes down on, 11 toes down on. So now being in this space where it's like, if you pull up on me, I'm going to get this quick story time. I'm shut the hell up. On a recent post I was in a situation 7 years ago with a man that I dated, and we went out on, I would say, a date with his family where I got a chance to meet his mom. And in meeting his mom, we were at this event, meeting went cool. So I thought next day, I think I might have asked him like, he asked me, how do you think things went? And I'm like, yeah, I think things went good. And he like had a completely opposite vision of what went well and what didn't. So I'm like, did your mama say something? He like, no, my mama ain't say nothing. But what it came down to was this was a man that had an idea of how, when I met his mom, how this interaction was going to go. And mind you, it did not go bad. Nobody was cursed out. Nobody was disrespected. Nobody was unprofessional. It was a very nice meeting. Sweet girl. His mama was, it was fine. But he had a problem because he had a vision for how I should have behaved or how I should have performed when I met his mammy. And so I'm like, yeah. So now I had a conversation with this person after we had broken up. And I had to tell him, like, it's cool that you feel a way about how people should perform when they are meeting your parents. I'm not going to try to change you from behaving in that way. But what I'll say to that is this. I don't deal with people who have that expectation. And I also don't deal with people that when they face adverse situations that are like a level 1, you're at a level 10. I got to have somebody that's very close to the same temperament as me, because if I have a interaction with someone and you feel like that, even though the interaction went well, but you feel like, as we say at work, you could have took it from good to great. If you feel like I could have took that interaction from good to great, I'm only going to be in a relationship with someone that we can have a conversation about it. You can let me know how you feel. I can receive that message and I can tell you, okay, I'll do better. Or I can say, okay, I don't think, that went wrong. And I'm probably going to be the same way the next time I meet her, So we have to figure out what that looks like. But I'm not going to be with anybody that this turns into like a 3-day ordeal and you feel like, oh, I'm over it after 3 days. Boy, fuck you by the third day. And he rose again. So I'm like, I'm not going to be in a relationship with people like that. And that's part of my non-negotiables. So that's just one. Temperament. What's your temperament? What's your level of grace? What's your level of self-awareness? What's your level of unhingement? Are things a level 1 or 2 and you already at a 9 or 10? I can't do it. So we're going to have a whole class on non-negotiables. But for now, I'll stop there. So non-negotiables, if you ain't got none, go get you some. And we'll be back with another episode. Signing off, yours truly, Shanna Montana.